Thank you for joining us again. This is part 3 of our ongoing series here to cover the conflict unraveling in Iran and through the economic lens, brought to you by the Economic and Legal Warfare Group at the Irregular Warfare Initiative. So we're joined here today by Hamlet and Gianni again. I think the audience at this point probably is familiar with our faces, so I think we're safe to just jump in and get started here. Again, another week of ongoing conflict and some predictable and maybe some unpredictable turns here. So let's get started. Hamlet, let's start with you. Kind of backtracking a bit, what do you think through an economic lens, where we're at and where we're going?
Oh, I think from an economic lens, I think what Iran is trying to do right now, the regime specifically, is they're trying to disrupt everything. They're attacking anything and everything that has a U.S. nexus to it. And I think what you're starting to see is this continued effort to attack both civilian and government infrastructure in the region. So they're reaching out and they're trying to hit our bases, our embassies, but they're also trying to disrupt energy markets and trade. And I think this ties into their desire to use this as a way to turn global opinion or regional opinion against the U.S. and Israel and go onto their side. As of right now, I don't think that's going to continue to work, but I just don't think the regime is going to let up. I think we're going to continue to see that. That also includes this continued pressure or selective pressure on trying to shut down the Straits of Hormuz to international trade.
Yeah, Gianni, over to you. I'm curious for your thoughts building on that.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting dynamics playing out, and I think that it's fascinating to see some of the folks getting on channels and talking about them, and somehow a lot of it doesn't address the kind of the big picture. And we have a very asymmetric advantage over the Iranians when it comes to almost, what you consider like the conventional way of fighting. I mean, joint service, multiple means of delivering munitions. We've now transitioned into a lot more kind of less standoff munitions and far more overhead because the threat is lower. But the Iranians still have a lot of stuff in their arsenal. I mean, the fact that they're using the ballistic missiles with bomblets, effectively, almost cluster munitions in Israel, we're seeing that is having an impact. It's not necessarily that the Israelis can't counter the ballistic missiles, but once a missile starts dispersing those bomblets, then there's carnage, and obviously it has had an impact. I can't draw the direct correlation between that kind of munition and the fact that they hit the South Pars Iranian gas fields. But I think the president of the United States has come out and said, look, they were very upset with the situation in the Middle East, and therefore they took action, and they're not going to do it again, because the moment that took place, the oil infrastructure or gas infrastructure was hit, the Iranians went up a notch on the asymmetric warfare and started hitting Qatari LNG plants. They started hitting other, oil and gas in the Gulf, and that just makes matters worse. In fact, it just creates and sets the conditions for yet more escalatory sort of behavior. And last time we talked on our second edition, we talked about the escalation ladder, and with the escalation ladder, there comes an escalation trap where one thing leads to another. I mean, Vietnam didn't start with a massive, conventional deployment and a draft. It started very limited, and it started growing. So I think we need to be very careful. I think the U.S., for better or for worse, we remain fairly narrowly focused on our limited objectives. I don't think that we've started varying from the ballistic missile threat, the nuclear, obviously, degradation, and now we're getting more and more into the denial of this Strait of Hormuz threat.
Mhm.
So all to say that it's been an exciting, okay, not in a good way, exciting week, but it's definitely been not boring.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll throw out there is, I think we're just we talked about this again last week. Every week, the options are getting harder. The off ramps seem more distant, and and there's a higher level of risk that's going into place. Now that may turn out far better next week because at one point the culmination happens, but right now I wouldn't predict that this thing is going to end in the next 3-4 weeks. It's likely to go further.
Yeah, I agree. I think that one of the biggest highlights of this week is the fact that President Trump's meeting with Xi Jinping has been pushed to the right. So I'm curious
Huge.
for your take on what does that mean? Because that's something we touched on last week, and that was going to be something that shaped the timeline of this, but potentially the global implications and how this is impacting on a broader scale. So what does that mean to you? Hamlet, let's start with you again on that.
Yes, we talked about this last week. I think we're all in agreement that all this was in a lead up to put pressure on China and give the president a stronger negotiating hand going into his meeting with Xi, his face-to-face with Xi. The fact that this is being pushed, I think, probably leads to a couple of different indicators. One being that we don't think we have the full lever points in our favor yet. And two, just to be frank, if you're the sitting president, I don't think you want to go to a foreign country that is directly supplying your adversary that you're in open conflict with. It's probably a bad idea. So for, I think, a whole host of reasons, that's going to get pushed. And getting pushed, I think, is different than canceling. I think that grand bargain negotiation, or whatever you want to call it, it's still going to happen, but it's not going to be in 2 weeks from now. So if that's the case, then that leads me to believe this conventional conflict is going to continue into April. And if you go back to timelines, the first bomb fell on the 28th of February. And even back then, I think the initial was, hey, this is going to be at least a 4 to 6 week campaign. If you take that number and double it, we're well into April and potentially into May. As far as the kinetic portion, the more conventional portion, the unconventional portion, which is the more use of asymmetric resources, drones versus conventional rockets, proxies in the region, that's going to continue, I think, well beyond just April.
Yeah, and I agree. And the one thing that I would add is that I mean, psychologically, you look at President Trump and you think businessman. Okay, he's not. He understands that he has not achieved an advantageous position for him to take into the meeting. So why take the risk?
Yeah.
So I think the Chinese will probably play a little hardball, on the rescheduling, but a lot of it will materialize once we have a little bit more of a direction. Again, the point here, I think, is that I don't think, unless the president of the United States turns around and says, you know what, I feel it in my bones, and it's over. I think we hit where we need to hit, and we're going to hit pause. That's about the only thing that will surprise any of kind of students of warfare like us.
Yep.
Because otherwise you're looking at this and say, okay, there's a lot more to do. This phase is not with a finite end state. It's condition based. You haven't reached the conditions. You haven't manifested and kind of applied your will on the opponent, and so and the Iranians still have a lot of fight in them.
Yep.
So I think that this is going to take longer than most people think, or at least most people that gave advice to the president that this is going to be a short one.
Yeah, I think to build on that, but then to pivot a bit too, is to think about the proxy forces and their actions in the region and how this is playing into it? I mean, we've seen fractures in the RGC, but does it showcase their resiliency, or does it speak to, I guess, the broader resiliency in the region, right? Like how dedicated these proxy forces are, how resilient are they, and then how does that continue to shape the conflict from both sides?
I think one thing we got to take a look at is economics. Yes, the Hezbollah and Hamas are ideologically aligned to hate the West and Israel and the U.S., but at the end of the day, people got to eat. So to what extent can the Iranians continue to support them financially? In the near term, I don't think that issue is going to go away. Longer term, the more we degrade the regime's capability and command and control structure, that's going to be a challenge and an issue. And if it ever gets to the point where the regime is further restricted from an economic standpoint, that is going to impact their longer term ability to sustain and operate these proxy forces. The challenge there, and I kind of, I guess, speaking at this from two different sides, is the motivation for Hezbollah and Hamas isn't money's a part of it, but they're also very ideologically driven. The downside of that is all three, the regime, Hamas, and Hezbollah, do have almost like a martyr's mindset. And if you have a zero sum mindset, where is the middle ground? There is no compromise, or is there? Is there a negotiating point? And if that's what we're dealing with, then again, this could be a slog that's going to continue for, I don't say for the foreseeable future, but it's not something that's going to come to an end before summer or midterms or whatever these false dates that we want to put out there in Western media.
Yeah, and Hamlet, I mean, you have decades of national security experience and Middle East play. Jackie, same with you. And my kind of focus area has been, on the periphery of Iran. I've always looked at Iran as kind of like the centerpiece, but I always focused on sort of the outer rings of the bullseye just because of access. So I have focused a hell of a lot more on the axis of resistance than I have on the actual kind of center mass and the centerpiece. So I'll give you some thoughts on the proxies from my standpoint around the go once around Iran. So Iraq has been fascinating in terms of proxies. In particular, in the last 24 hours, there has been a move towards some kind of a limited ceasefire between the resistance factions and U.S. coalition, kind of strikes against them. It's obviously in kind of like pro-resistance media and some independent outlets, but for the most part, that is geared to say, okay, don't hit us, we won't hit you for the time being. Now, everybody thinks that that's not going to last long because that may impact some of the resistance factions because they don't want their resistance leaders going away. I mean, Kataib Hezbollah had their leader and their top security guy targeted, and the Secretary General survived. The top security guy didn't. So there's some, there's impact on it. It's not just some low level guys getting hit anymore. So that's one thing. The other thing in Iraq is also that Iraq has overwhelmingly depends on its oil exports to survive. So two things have happened in the last few days. One is that they're trying to push more oil through to Turkey, from Kurdistan up to Turkey. And that's supposed to, that's not going to hit the millions of barrels that they're trying to get out per day, but it's going to increase the output somewhat. But the gas that was coming out of Iran to help with power in Iraq has stopped, or at least partially stopped. And that's going to have an impact in Iraq. So the region, at least starting again with proxies, is recognizing the longer this thing goes, the more damage that's going to be done, right? Then going around Hezbollah, we know that there is the limited ground incursion that's taking place in South Lebanon from the Israelis. They're trying to put distance. I think that, that Hezbollah is far, far diminished. The pagers, the walkie-talkie attacks, that just absolute. And the last round, the last time we actually had like the serious bombing, I think that was devastating for Hezbollah. They still have some fight, but it's going. Not many people are paying on to the Hamas point, and even West Bank, Hamlet. I think you're onto something there in terms of that the Israelis will take advantage of this. They're fighting a multi-pronged war, and this is definitely playing out. The next one that I'll go, it's the big one, the Houthis. Whatever happened to those guys? And I think that they're calculating this. When do they get in? When do they get in? They certainly have some problems, but they also have the other strait. The Bab el-Mandab that also covers another, whatever it is, 12% of global trade. So I think we have to be concerned to keep them out.
Yep.
But overall, I think the proxies are not playing as powerful of a role as certainly Iran wished they did. But that doesn't mean that that they're not going to hit a spike as well. And the last thing I'll throw out is, and it goes back again to center mass. We've noticed that the ballistic missiles and the drones have had a little bit of a spike. Everybody has been seeing it dip, but the moment that you have the targeting the oil infrastructure or the gas infrastructure in this particular point, I think you start seeing that they still have capability to start, kind of bumping up the numbers a little bit. That's where I would stop with the proxies. But if you have any questions on it, obviously we can go into it.
Something I'm curious about, and I think you guys are the right guys to ask about this, is the overlay and the interplay between information operations and their economic warfare strategies, right? Like these things are linked in a lot of ways, and I think as we see some of their more kinetic resources diminish, like how are they going to utilize this to counter that and to make some meaningful impact in the region, and then potentially to inspire some activity here and domestically in the homeland?
Yeah, I'll jump on that first. I mean, on the cognitive piece and the information warfare piece, excuse me. I think parts of that are working. When you see the quintessential red meat eating hard right MAGA base parrot talking points from the hard left anti-Trump populace within the U.S., something's getting through. This anti-war, anti-Iran campaign. Iran does not pose an existential threat to the U.S. Why do we do this? When you hear both extremes parroting the same talking points, to me that usually looks like some sort of a focused effort to turn both ends against the middle. So I think that part of it is working. And I think the more and more the Iranian regime can kind of fan the flames of global economic destruction or disruption because of the Straits of Hormuz and continue to play these images of burning oil fields, I think it feeds into that. When President Trump comes out and talks about, well, maybe China and Europe should send forces to help keep the strait open. Again, that's a valid talking point, but how that talking point is politicized on social media and parroted, I think that speaks. I mean, to me, that's clear evidence that there's a concerted effort to do that. And at that point, I don't think it's Iran in a vacuum. I think they're probably comparing notes and TCPs with China and Russia on how do you influence different parts of the electorate. I hate to say it, I mean, we're pretty short-sighted as a country, and we got the attention span less than a 20-second YouTube clip or a 4-paragraph or even a 4-bullet point post on online. Anything beyond that, it's swipe or whatever. So I think that infrastructure and that kind of mindset is being weaponized against us as we speak.
God, Hamlet, I swear to God, man, you throw out so much chum out there that I'm just gonna, it's hard to not bite, man. So look, there is an information warfare that's um, that's almost like not necessarily based on the opponent, but it's completely self-generated. What you just described, the right and the left, we have Senate and Congress having hearings with the DNI and all the intelligence, and they're bombing, throwing a whole bunch of stuff there, and it's generating information from like completely from within. It's not like the Iranians are throwing out massive nuclear kind of information bombs,
Yep.
and they're just taking out everybody. It's just like we're doing this is like shooting our foot all the time. But I would say that information operations, if you have to grade all of our military operations right now, I'd say the air campaign, the way that they, okay, were there no mistakes? Absolutely not. But in terms of professionally run, kinetic fight, I think that the grades are very high. Information operations, I would not necessarily grade that one very high, because we're just enamored with the lethality. We're enamored with the 7,000 bombs dropped. We're not enamored with effects. We're enamored with, we took out the leadership. Okay, and then what? What did you do with the layer below? I mean, I highly encourage people to read about Qasem Soleimani. Qasem Soleimani wasn't the Mahdi.
Yeah.
Okay, Qasem Soleimani was a guy that was for people that don't necessarily follow Iranian IRGC Quds Force leadership, Qasem Soleimani was the architect of the axis of resistance in the Middle East. I mean, what we're seeing and what we've been fighting for the last 20 years, this guy had his paws all over it. And Qasem Soleimani was killed on the 3rd of January, 2020. And when you were having it, when he was killed, it was a giant deal. Okay, but Qasem Soleimani was like a low-level bodybuilder that just happened to be around in the revolution, and kind of some things happened and he moved his way, and then the war with Iraq happened, and then he moved a little bit. But there is a lot of Qasem Soleimanis. He was the one. Okay, he's a big dude. But there are a lot of other people over the last 47 years that have taken, and so this enamoration with, like, we killed Laranjani, you got it. We killed Khatami, okay, got it. There is no tipping point, to use a term that's kind of thrown out there, that's based on the capitulation on the decapitation strategy. There's no like some dude, and if you kill him, it's over. Similarly, if 7,000, okay, well, why don't you make it 200,000? Is there a number between the hits? So the moment that we fall in love with these very kind of, what we, in the absence of knowing what to do, we do what we know. So 7,000, 10,000. Next week it's going to be 12,000. Brilliantly executed. Fantastic. To what? To what end? These guys lob the Shahed 136, and and it hits things, and Dubai International closes, or something blows up, or there are no ships moving out. Well, there are some ships moving through, but it's not the ones that we want, and at what point do you get the fertilizer problems, and what point do you get the above 120 on this? All this stuff will go away, but again, we're not focusing so much on the information operations. And the president goes out there and he gives his talks, and he's he likes, maybe he doesn't like the cameras and the media, but he is good at it. And he pushes some things, but he should not be the information operations commander in chief. It should be other things. And even the Secretary of Defense, look, he's got a style. You can be completely against it, or you can be completely for it. But as long as it's with purpose, and IO relies on media, relies on people that deliver your messages. So, when we alienate certain people, it becomes, kind of a problem in getting the message out. So I don't think that I wouldn't give ourselves a high grade on IO. We have enormous potential. We have enormous capabilities, but I don't think that that's the emphasis item right now. Now, on the contrary, I think not just the Iranians, but all others are not doing that much better.
Mm-hmm.
But again, when we turn on ourselves, then we're doing their job for them.
Yep.
Yeah, it's playing into that hand, right? You said tipping point, and let's talk about potential tipping points. I mean, there's a lot of talk about people and analysts and thinking through what's it going to take to get to a particular objective or a particular timeline. I mean, what are the tipping points for the IRGC as for where we stand now? Because next week this could be totally different, but
Yeah.
where we stand now, I mean, let's think about what are the big objectives that might be the thing that causes that effect.
I hope I'm wrong, but when we talk next week, I don't think we're going to see a significant difference in terms of where we are today versus next week. I think this continued degradation effort is going to still be there with the U.S. and Israel trying to hit any hard military target they can, and as the next level of bad guys or hardliners pops up and kind of sticks their head out of the rat hole, they're going to get schwacked. I think that's going to continue into next week and beyond. The tipping point, I think, is going to happen where at some point, and it's not going to be us, it's going to be within Iran. Folks are going to say enough is enough. And I've said this quote going back 10 years. More than 80% of that country of Iran does not want the regime in power in any way, shape, or form. That 20% that has wanted to hold on and has backed the Islamic Republic or the regime, I think has been evenly split in two camps. 10% truly believe in the Islamic ideology that Khomeini put in place. The other 10% represent the kleptocracy and the oligopoly that's enriched themselves over the decades, and they don't want to lose power because they don't want to lose control and they don't want to lose money. But they don't believe in the ideology, which means they're not true martyrs to the ideology. So that leaves you with really 10% of the country that you got to focus and, lack of a better word, concentrate fire on. And I think that's who right now is being targeted by Israel and the U.S. Unfortunately, that small minority, that 10%, has access to a large chunk of the weapons and the arms, and they have a stranglehold on the country. I detest and hate with every ounce of my being the IRGC and the Quds Force. But having known Iran long enough and studied this target, the IRGC is not monolithically hardline true establishment. There are factions within that group, from senior command all the way to low-level officers, that are probably more nationalistic or joined because of benefits and perks. At some point, they're going to say, like, that this is a sinking ship, and these guys want to die swinging. I don't want to be part of that. So I think you're going to see that resistance point come about at some point. I also always said I thought regime change was going to happen within Iran when one of two things happened. You had the death of Khamenei, and that would kickstart an internal struggle to see who takes over the reins of the Islamic Republic, and that's going to kind of spurn and almost like a turf war within that 20%. And I think we're seeing that right now, obviously, with the death of Khamenei and this anointment of his son Mujtaba, which no one hasn't seen in a week. And the other threat of regime change was going to happen when the economic elites and the establishment that was not necessarily hardline aligned felt that they were eminently going to lose power and wealth and control, and they would turn around and rise up and stab the regime in the back. We're seeing both those events happen right now. So I think if you're looking for a tipping point, that's when it's going to be is when the establishment's light or the hardline light within the regime. So you know what, enough is enough. We got too much to lose. We're now going to work on outing where the hardliners are. We're now going to support the people. At some point, the people will take to the streets. It's going to be interesting to see what that looks like. Because if that inflection point happens, you have the uprising in the streets, and you have that quiet uprising within the establishment, that's when this tipping point could happen, literally overnight. For me to say it's going to happen Tuesday, next week, 2 weeks, three, it's anyone's guess at that point. But that, I think, is the direction we want to go. Will we get there? God, I hope so.
I don't think that this is anywhere near tipping point material, and I'll give you the reasons for it. First, and I'll give you some what I think would get us there faster, but I just don't see it. I think that there right now, I think most people would agree that the revolution that needs to occur is going to happen from within.
Yep.
In Iran. It's not going to happen with something that happens externally and or driven by external factors. External factors can certainly help foment certain things, but we're not doing anything to foment. In fact, we're telling them stay at home because a lot of things are going to go boom, don't get hurt.
Yep.
So we're not in the phase. Again, we're enamored with the kinetics, and we're not paying attention to what really needs to happen now. I would say that there are a couple pathways to get us there, and I think that we need to kind of work on them simultaneously because we don't know which one of these will really get us there, and I don't think that we should put all our eggs in one basket. Now, the Shah, or the former, the son of the Shah, Reza Pahlavi's, anointed crown prince. I'm not. That is he's a mover, not a shaker. Okay, he's not going to do much to get anything. Any talk about the Kurds, you're talking about a very small piece in a very small region, and that's not going to have countrywide thing. The revolution needs to have multiple phases to it, and I think that we should be fomenting a revolution. By the way, the U.S. is actually rather good at that. I know that it's not en vogue to talk about, what we used to do in terms of changing governments and all that, but fomenting an insurgency and sticking it to a regime that's not doing so well, we've done this fairly well. We've not done so well in the counterinsurgency, but in the insurgency part, we're rather good at it. I think that we should be doing something about that. The other thing, again, it goes into the information operations. Man, there's so much stuff going on right now that we're not taking advantage. I'll give you two examples. Mojtaba Khamenei, okay? He's the supreme leader. He's not an Ayatollah. In fact, he's a barely mid-level cleric, okay?
Yeah.
In the Iranian system that has, the guardianship of jurists, the Walaya Fakir, you're talking about that person, that's the supreme leader, is also both political and religious. There's no, there's a difference between the Shia doctrine in Iraq. In Najaf, it's different. There's, Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani does not believe that, okay? Muqtada al-Sadr, people know him. Well, his daddy and his uncle didn't believe necessarily in that. Different seminaries, different thoughts. And so we're not leveraging this kind of thinking in order to do certain things. So it's really problematic that we're not looking at it that way.
Yeah. Most about taking over is analogous to like a senior director being named CEO of a company. Grossly underqualified.
Yeah, and you wonder to what extent that's causing turmoil there, and then, like you said, Gianni, that builds on like perhaps a missed opportunity to capitalize on some information operations that could be really pivotal right now. So potentially, if we see an uptick in some of our more offensive abilities to inspire some movement amongst the Iranian people, maybe that's an indicator for us that we're going to be backing away from some of the kinetic strikes. I mean, I don't know. It's something to kind of think through.
Or the other piece, or the other example I was going to throw out, and again, Hamlet is so much better versed in this than me, but the Iranian Revolution, they used to smuggle tapes of Khomeini into Iran because the Shah would not allow. I mean, he had a pretty tight lid on the situation as well in terms of, you know, state apparatus for security. And they used to smuggle tapes in. So right now, I'm thinking that why are we? Maybe we're doing it. By the way, maybe it's
Right.
happening, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But are we getting Starlink in? Are we getting the mechanisms to be able to broadcast the messages? You know, IO doesn't really do much, you know, if nobody's able to listen to you.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to get the materials in, even if it's tapes, even if it's, you know, mechanisms for, you know, short burst. Some things need to be happening in order for us to get the message to foment this thing from happening. But again, whether it's happening or not, you know, that's we're outside looking in, right? So it's always so easy to say, well, those guys should have been doing, you know, it's like, okay, buddy, take it, you know, take it down a notch. But certainly it doesn't seem like that is the maybe it's covert. We'll leave it at that. But I hope that it's taking place.
Like I think the information warfare inbound has been going on for a while. It's the reason why the Israelis called their June operation Operation Rising Lion, and Netanyahu was very vocal, saying this was not about the Iranian people, but it was about taking out the regime. Continue to stress the fact that the Israelis and the Iranians have had a long history of cooperation and mutual admiration. So I think that theme is continuing. And if you take a look at what we've targeted, and this is a bit of speculation in terms of what does boots on the ground mean. There's been a bunch of pontifications of whether there's ever going to be U.S. troops on the ground and what's the relevance and significance of Karg Island, which is something that Trump posted and commented about. President Trump did earlier this week. That island, that little block of limestone off the coast of Bushehr in southwest Iran, I think that little island is responsible for almost 80% of the oil that leaves Iran. 90%, yeah, almost all. Thanks for the cues. But it's also a base of operations for the IRGC and the standard military for their naval forces. So if they want to shut down the Straits of Hormuz and put out a bunch of minesweepers, that's where it was going to come from. And Trump was very vocal. I think his exact words: "We bombed every piece of military hardware on that island." And I think the reason we did that is if there's ever a scenario where there are U.S. boots on the ground, it would be to hold that island. And if we hold that island, going back to the economics of warfare, we could at that point then begin to asphyxiate oil revenues into Iran and try to starve out or drown out the regime, but also keep troops there to protect that infrastructure for when there is regime change. That infrastructure is fully intact, that we can hand that back to whatever regime that takes over what we have right now, so they can very quickly continue to monetize the oil that Iran has and rebuild the country. So that's where we're at this point. Is this pressure on the regime has to come from both ends. It's got to be economic and it's got to be kinetic from abroad, and it's also got to come in from the internal, because I hate to be a negative here, but I don't think there's any negotiating with this regime. And Ioannis, you spent time in the Middle East. All three of us have dealt with the CT target. If a guy shows up on your front doorstep with a suicide vest and he's committed to paying the ultimate sacrifice and committing jihad and blowing himself up, are you negotiating with that person, or do you deal and address with a threat? There is no common ground between a guy who wants to clock himself off and the guy who wants to live. If this regime, the hardliners that are in charge of Iran, truly have that martyr's mindset, then at some point you got to understand: is there any talking sense to this nation state that is now wants to eradicate itself as part of their long-term vision of what the afterlife is going to look like? And again, that just like a suicide bomber is not representative of the Middle East, this regime is not representative of Iran. So the CT issue is addressed when we do our purging kinetic activities, but the society internally rises up and says, you know, we're not about this anymore. And maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but if you look at the Middle East right now, the CT issue is not a major issue anymore. You're starting to see most of the Middle East, the areas that we thought were lost causes, leaving Afghanistan out of this for now, parts of it are starting to realize, you know what, we got a brighter future ahead of us where the old ways are no longer necessary. And I think that same kind of mindset is going to apply to Iran. Again, going back to the conversation earlier, when does that tipping point happen? In my opinion, that tipping point happens when internally enough people, the rank and file, but just the average citizenry get to that point, like, right, you know what, we've had it. We're now going to take control of our own country. Because I do agree with Yanni when it comes to regime change, us and Israel should have no part in saying that's going to be the next leader or this is the next government we're going to take over. Our job right now is to get rid of that threat, to get rid of the guy who wants to clack off, and then allow the people to choose what they want to be as their country going forward. Is it going to include the Shah's son? Good. If you guys want to have him, great. If you want to have a technocratic run government, great. If you want to have a mild-mannered, theocratic light government, that's where you end up, great. But this regime that is in charge right now, that is continually being degraded, I just don't know if there's any negotiating with that. I don't see where that common ground would look like.
Well, it's certainly not going to be any negotiating with them when we're dealing with the gun.
Yeah.
I mean, like right now, there's nobody, not Al-Arachi, not any former presidential hopeful that was actually hoping to get moderate. I mean, we have theoretically a moderate president in Iran, by all accounts, know. So I mean, there's a lot to be said about the pragmatism of the Iranian, kind of person. It's I know that we want to paint the picture of the bodies going over the berms in the Iran-Iraq war and just thousands being slaughtered, and it doesn't matter, we'll just make more, the Russian way of fighting almost, like just throw more bodies at it until, they capitulate. I'm not sure that that's what's going on right now, Hamlet. I think that there are definitely people. I mean, look, if you had pulled out the cabinet of Iran, a couple of years ago, I mean, even now, but you would see a whole bunch of them went to university in California and went to universities in the U.S. and the West. I don't think that it's. I mean, we're building a smart Taliban guy. Talib told me once, you Americans, you like to create the definition of your enemy, and then you fight that definition. So in some ways, we have defined the problem set. Theocratic, they're all going to clack themselves off. They're just suicide bombers when it comes to it. So, of course, we define that, and now we say, well, you clearly can't deal with these people. So what's the answer? 7,000 bombs, 10,000 bombs, 200,000 bombs. Just kill them, and let God sort them out. Well, that's not necessarily, how this works. Now, the other extreme, let's just plant trees and, everything will work out. Let's just ship them, buttloads of cash, and somehow they'll see the light, because their wives like Louis Vuitton and they like going to London, whatever the hell the other extreme is. That doesn't work either. But you got to have a pathway beyond either shoot them or hug them. And that isn't the answer right now. It's never been in the Middle East, and it's not there. The same thing with, everybody in the Middle East somehow hates Israel. Not everybody hates Israel, but there are certain Israeli behaviors that people just get, like Jordan, for example. They used to trade. They used to do a lot of things, but you start doing what you're doing to Palestinians, no Jordanian is going to be look at you in any sort of positive light when you talk about your model ally, Israel, right? I mean, like, what are we? I thought we were your model ally kind of thing, So there's a lot of, Middle East is a weird place. I'm sure every place is weird, but, you got to really pay attention to things. You can't just paintbrush things and just, say X and Y and then just move on with it.
Agreed. Very, very much so.
Yeah.
So
listen, we are just about at time now. So, I mean, I think we covered a lot of the big topics that came about this week, just short of air power superiority. Shani, I know that was something we were gonna we wanted to hit on from last week. Was
Hey, listen,
I mean,
Mark isn't here. I'll
right?
save it for next time. But
Yeah.
I do have a question, Jackie, and I'll throw one right back to you and Hamlet. Okay, we're gonna do this next week. It's number 4. I'm a former soft guy. Hamlet's a former current still even national security. You're military veteran, senior military veteran, been at this for a long time. Next week, give me some predictions. What's going to happen next week?
Gosh, I think Hamlet kind of hit on this before, but it pains me a little bit to say it because I think we're going to be a little bit more in the same of what we're in now, and I worry
Sure.
that we're kind of hitting a point where we need that tipping point to happen internally in Iran, and we want to be able to see an uprising so that we can start to see the handoff there. So optimistically, I'd like to see that maybe that's where we are, but I think all eyes are really on Kharg Island. What's going on in terms of boots on the ground, or they're not boots on the ground, but how do you effectively see that as an objective and take it and secure it without that? So that's just something that I'm looking at and thinking through. But Hamlet, what are your thoughts? I'm curious.
I think what we're going to see is escalation to de-escalate. I think Iran is going to escalate their asymmetric conflict and their ability to reach out and touch our assets and the Arab neighbors, primarily through use of drones. So I think you can see an escalation there. I think you're going to see probably some pressure on the administration to escalate, to de-escalate, try to force capitulation. The worst case scenario that I hope does not happen is as Iran begins to escalate, to de-escalate, they're going to be launching their drones that they've built in their underground facilities, littered throughout densely populated areas. Is if we fall for that bait and go after those facilities, in some cases we may have to we may be pulled into hitting locations that are inside cities. And I think that's exactly what Iran wants. Hezbollah and Hamas didn't wake up one day and say, hey, it would be a good idea if we built these mass cavernous tunnel networks under mosques and schools and civilian infrastructure. The Iranians taught them that. So I think it's safe to assume that Iran has built that capability to house these small drones and rockets under civilian infrastructure. And at some point, if they escalate use of those assets against us and we want to strike back, do we then start hitting cities? And if that's the case, then I hate to say it, Iran, I think the regime wants that, because then they get to use that as fodder to run on CNN and BBC and whatever else, talking about how the evil Americans are now bombing civilians and citizens. So that allows them to escalate the cognitive piece of this. That's what I hope does not happen.
Yeah, I will answer my own question, I guess. I think Kharg Island's going to be a big mistake if we tackle it now.
Yeah.
I think that we've shown Exhibit A, Israelis hitting the South Pars fields, and then the Iranians just went, okay, here we go. You just raised it up. We're going to escalate one more level, and we're going to take it to your plants, your this, your that. I think if we go into Kharg Island, I think they're gonna. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it because they're going to escalate, but we need to take into account that there's going to be a major escalation. Now, whether that's mines start going into the strait, and now you have, or they scuttle a ship, or they create some kind of a massive ecological issue, or nuclear option is they go after desalination plants in the Gulf. I mean, the Gulf doesn't have that much water, so desalination is a major deal. So if they start going after that, now it's now you're hitting like ability to sustain.
Yeah.
So I think that that's going to be a major problem if we go there. I think that the Marines may actually, in order to protect sea lanes, you may actually have to deploy some Marines somewhere, but I think it's going to be to protect the sea lanes. It's not to hold terrain, to hold ransom.
Yeah.
So I think that we need to put on our caps, our imagination caps, and start thinking about what could happen, rather than, you know, sort of this administration has been pretty good about doing some head fakes. And I think that, you know, we need to obviously not mess with head fakes, because it's in our favor when our nation is able to get something across. So I don't want to kind of speculate into it, but certainly I think that I don't see Carg Island being. I don't recommend it. Let's just leave it at that.
Right.
Yeah.
Agreed. Not recommended, but we'll, I know all eyes are on it, but I mean, I hope you're right. I hope that the Marines are coming in. It's going to help facilitate the flow of and secure, you know, the strait, and then we'll be in a better economic standing so that they take some of the pressure off. Right. So,
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a better
Yeah.
way of putting it.
All right. Well, I think we're wrapped today. If you guys have any closing insights, I mean, I'd love to open it back up and get those out there for the group, and then we'll think through part 4.
This is exciting. I love the opportunity. Good.
Yeah, no. Age before beauty. I mean, or at least in this case.
Yeah, that's a toss-up then. Go ahead. You started.
Yeah,
I apologize.
no, all I was going to say is I would just ask anybody that listens to this, put your comments in our channel, in the YouTube channel, IWI channel, and you know that can also help us feed some of the discussion as we do this next week. So that's the only plug.
Yeah, well said. We read our comments, so if you guys want us to take these conversations in a certain direction, we certainly can. I think between the three of us, we got reach to an impressive number of other speakers that we can bring into the conversation. And this is, like I said, a problem that's not going to go away. So I want to thank IWI for taking the initiative here. I think this is a well-warranted conversation. And this is a very biased statement. I think a lot of the talking heads we're seeing on TV right now from both sides of the aisle having a clue what they're talking about. So I like these frank conversations that help kind of break down complex issues for our listeners. So I want to thank everyone for their time.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll see you next week. And from
See you next week.
thanks for tuning in.
See y'all.